It's a pleasure to be back here. So first of all, I would like everyone to give a round of applause, if you don't mind, to the organizers, because it's been really a tough journey since 2019. And it's not just all the work that goes into organizing something like this, but also obviously with the pandemic, not knowing when it could happen, when it couldn't happen. So I had a little glimpse of what that was, and so I think they deserve a big round of applause. So, as you notice, I'm not Charity. She's not here, unfortunately. I don't curse as much as Charity, unless I'm driving. That's the only time. But I hope to entertain you for the next 45 minutes. I'm going to talk about what is this frozen DevOps, what do I mean by that, and the not-so-technical last mile. But also, I hope to give you a little kind of state of the nation of DevOps in 2022, at least from my perspective. So, as mentioned, I'm one of the co-authors of the book Team Topologies, came out in 2019, and also there's a workbook specifically around remote interactions that came out earlier this year. But what's interesting in terms of DevOps, and I quite like this quote, is one of my favorites from Jeff Sussna, saying that Team Topologies provides a practical set of templates for addressing key DevOps questions that others leave as an exercise. Meaning, it talks about the team structures, the interactions, and what needs to happen for effective DevOps, right? We all know it's not just about tooling and automation. Are there any parents in the room with small kids? So you'll be glad to know this is not what this talk is about, okay? We're not going to talk about Frozen, the movie, or the movies. So where are we with DevOps in 2022? I mean, it started in 2009. So actually, if you look at the InfoQ Trends report, so I suppose many are familiar with InfoQ. And so based on the experience of the people and the practitioners, they said that in 2019, DevOps entered the late majority, right? If you look at the adoption lifecycle, basically means every organization almost is thinking about DevOps for the last few years, and they are focusing on what do we need to do to improve the organization, what are the DevOps practices and tooling and all that we need to have in place. And so there might be a few organizations that are still not very interested in DevOps, but I would expect those to be sort of a niche, and maybe they have some sort of monopoly or something like that they don't have to worry about improving the development and operation practices and the flow of change. So basically, okay, if we're all thinking about DevOps, we're all trying to adopt good DevOps practices and culture and all that, why is there still a difference between high-performing, middle-performing, and low-performing organizations? And that's what this State of DevOps report that came out last year and the previous one. So this report has been coming out for, I think, more than or almost 10 years. And so what they do, if you're not familiar, is they have a survey and they have thousands of people around the world answering about their DevOps practices, their performance, etc. So what's particular about last year is that they started looking in the survey, they started asking about what are your team structures, how do teams relate to each other, how do they interact, and so on. And this is what gives us new insights on what distinguishes high-performing from lower-performing organizations. So one of the key ideas, or conclusions, I should say, that came from the report is success at scale requires optimizing the wider organization, the team of teams, right? So it's not just about the performance of individuals and individual teams, but actually how the ecosystem of teams performs and delivers for the organization, right? So that's one key aspect to keep in mind. And what the report showed over the years, at least over the last 4 years, as you can see, the low-performing organizations, and I'll talk in a minute about what this means, lower-performing, higher-performing. You might be familiar with it already. But you can see that it's going down, which makes sense. As more organizations at least, adopt cloud, adopt some automation, improve the development operations, the low performing is going down. So it's actually, I would say, the least interesting part of the report is the low performing. When you look at the high performing organizations, the percentage is going up by a little bit, right? 2%, 4% per year, but it's not a big change, right? So this should trigger some questions. Why aren't organizations able to get to high performance? More, or at least faster, right? You would expect maybe we would get to 20, 30, 40% much faster. And so here might lie the answer, or at least the consequence is that a lot of organizations are kind of stuck in the middle, right? So you see the numbers are sort of frozen, right? So this is the mid-performing organizations. And this is what I'm calling the frozen middle, or the frozen DevOps performance. So what does that mean exactly? Many of you might be familiar with the book Accelerate and the DORA metrics, as people refer to them. So 4 key metrics that differentiate high-performing teams and organizations. And when you look at especially these numbers and metrics that are outlined, you can see that lead time for changes, how long it takes for us to get from an idea until it's actually available to the customers, and mean time to repair when we have some incident with a service or application, how long it takes to fix it, get it back up and running. You see there's quite a big difference between high-performing can do those things in less than an hour. So in theory, are able to have, let's say, a customer request or a business idea. As long as it's, of course, small and constrained, we should be able to get that delivered through our pipelines into production in less than an hour. That's quite impressive, right? So when I think about, when people talking about business agility, for example, to me, this is partially what that means. To really be agile with our business, we need to be able to respond this quickly. So less than an hour. But as you saw, only 16% of organizations are able to do that, from the ones that answered the survey. So most of them are there in the middle. So it takes maybe up to a week to get a small change into production. It takes up to a day to fix a problem on average and get the service back up and running. So you can see why is it important to have high performance. And we're now going to look at why these organizations are able to get to that state. And we're going to start looking at what are mid-performing organizations doing and what's different in high-performing organizations. Right? Why are so many organizations frozen, let's say, in this middle? So one of the things that middle-performing organizations will say typically, and that this is a good thing, right? We're not saying this is bad. They're going to say we have cloud, we're cloud native, we have CI/CD, we have SRE observability. That's all great. That's all needed from an engineering perspective, all these good practices. But why is this not enough? Or why is this just the bare minimum? Well, we could ask, what does this mean exactly? Do you mean that you have the tooling, or do you mean that you have a cloud team, a CI/CD team, SRE team, etc.? Or does this mean these are the capabilities that you have in the organization that your DevOps teams, or however you want to call it, or delivery teams can use and understand, right? So it depends a lot on how are we actually delivering these capabilities, making them available to the organization. And that's where I think they are sometimes missing out. So the report mentions that organizations should not expect to become highly evolved just because they use cloud and automation. That's kind of table stakes now. That's kind of the minimum you need to have to just be in the market, right? The thing that keeps them from higher performance are structure, organizational structure and dynamics. And I know that we don't always or not everyone is interested in this part because it's difficult, because it takes time. But we are at a point where this is really the competitive advantage, is thinking about how do we have a team of teams, an organization that's actually supporting each other and making us more performant. One of the things that is important, like I said, is think about your capabilities. So if those cloud capabilities and other kind of service automation are still kind of bounded by a team that kind of controls that, we have what we call blocking dependencies possibly, meaning if we are a team trying to get a change to our customers and we have to stop at some point and wait for cloud infrastructure to be made available to us, maybe we have some ticket request to a cloud team, that means we're going to have to stop this change, right? As soon as we stop the work on the change, then it's directly going to increase the time it takes, the lead time to get it to our customers. And the same thing for anything else where you have a blocking dependency, where you say we have to stop what we're doing as a service delivery team or whatever you want to call it, because we have to wait on this dependency. We have to wait for another team to have the time or have the availability to provide something to us. So that's what we call blocking dependencies. The more we have of those, the lower performing we're going to be around those key metrics about lead time, how frequently we can deploy changes, etc. So instead, we would like to have non-blocking dependencies. Typically, this is often provided by some sort of internal platform, where ideally we'd like to have self-service approach, where a team needs some infrastructure, they can use a platform service that provides that infrastructure in a self-service way. The same for deployments or for anything else that they need to do, right? So if we're talking about fast flow of change, we're going to need to have possibly multiple internal platforms around different areas. Typically, we start thinking about CI/CD, deployments, infrastructure, etc., but we can have other kinds of platforms around data, for example, making data available to teams. So I don't want to explain in detail. That's not the point of today, the team types and structures in Team Topologies, but just briefly, if you have what we call stream-aligned team, a stream-aligned team is a team that has ownership over some service or application, right? And what ideally we want them to do is have the ownership and the capacity to take an idea or a change from conception all the way until it's available to customers without depending on, without blocking dependencies, right? So we typically going to need platforms to help us do that, but there also, for example, we might need enabling teams. So enabling teams usually help other teams learn about some domain of knowledge that might be not so easy to understand and to learn. And so they reduce the learning curve for the stream-aligned teams. Can be anything. Could be learning about test automation, could be learning about SRE, could be learning about cloud native, and other things that might be less technical as well. So if you think about these things, CI/CD, SRE, observability, as a capability that you want the stream-aligned teams or application teams to have, it's probably going to need a combination of platform services in that self-service approach, as well as some enabling work, right? Helping those teams, because if you have many teams in your organization, they're not all at the same level of understanding, of experience around these areas, right? So some teams might be starting from, let's say, a more inexperienced level. Other teams already know some things, but they still need to learn more. And so for any of those capabilities, typically you're going to need this combination of services in a platform as well as some sort of teaching, mentoring, helping those teams upskill quickly. And if people are familiar with Andrew Clay Schaefer, he was part of the DevOps movement from the early stages back in 2009. And he said DevOps was always as much about organizational structure and incentives as any of the technical details. Of course, over the years, we saw a lot more attention given to technical aspects and tooling automation, which is obviously important as well. But this is always on the mind of the people who started DevOps. And the report also said that organizations where teams have strong identities that are well understood with clearly defined responsibilities are far more likely to be higher performing, right? So again, we are looking at what differentiates higher performing organizations. They have teams that have a clear mission and purpose and how that relates to other teams. So, like I said, mid-performing organizations, a lot of them will have this kind of approach, but we need clarity. What does this mean exactly? It's just teams is a capability. If it's a capability, how are you providing this capability to the teams? Is it in a blocking or non-blocking way? Are you helping teams accelerate by giving these capabilities in a way that's easy to learn and to consume and to use them? And that's what high-performing organizations do. They have teams with clear mission and purpose that is understood by other teams. And this makes it simpler to actually develop those capabilities and learn and grow. So another aspect that middle-performing organizations talk about often, and this sounds great. In paper, everyone collaborates with everyone else. We will promote collaboration. And sometimes you hear this from C-level and senior management, and it sounds great. But actually, what does it mean? If we need to collaborate this much, if we're expected to collaborate with many teams, is that really helping us or not? And so collaboration is actually expensive for real-time work, meaning, again, if the collaboration is basically you have a blocking dependency and you have to stop what you're doing as a stream-aligned team, as we call them, or a application team, if you have to stop and you need to collaborate with another team to do a deployment or to get some infrastructure, then it's actually costly for all those key metrics we saw earlier. And so it's not very scalable, especially if we're in high growth and we're having more and more teams. And if we have this kind of, hopefully this, for everyone, this looks like from 20 years ago, I hope, or 10 years ago, and you don't have this anymore. But the idea is the more teams you have with dependencies across the life cycle of your applications, with handovers, and then you look at the feedback cycle. Also, you need to have the feedback going through all these teams, usually to get back to the original team. When this happens, we're really not going to be high performing, right? We're not going to be able to have a short lead time, get changes to customers very quickly, or respond quickly to problems. In fact, what happens in some organizations is that when we're saying, well, everyone collaborates with everyone else, of course, look at it. You can't get anything done if you don't collaborate with all these other teams, right? And so this is becoming a real bottleneck and a problem for these mid-organizations. Essentially, we can't just expect collaboration. And now in this remote or hybrid context that most people work in our industry, or a lot of people do, it gets even more difficult, right? To get the collaboration going, you're trying to reach someone on Slack or on some other chat tool, and they're not available. Maybe they're in another time zone. And those things are becoming even more expensive, this collaboration that we're talking about. And so what happens sometimes is we're hiding, the collaboration is hiding the blocking dependencies, hiding the problems in flow. So with Team Topologies, one of the things that many organizations have found useful is that we defined what we think are the 3 core interaction modes between teams, where you have collaboration defined explicitly as 2 teams working together for a specified period of time, right? It's not an open-ended relationship between teams. Actually, okay, we have a problem, or we have to find some solution for a common issue. We're going to get together for a week or 2 weeks or whatever it might be, and we're going to work on this together. We know it costs. We won't be able to deliver what we have in our backlog as quickly, but it's worth it, so we can address that problem or find that common solution. Often collaboration can be used to remove or make blocking dependencies less impactful, right? We can use collaboration for that. And then we talk about X as a service. That's essentially when you use some kind of platform services in that way, in that self-service way that we talked about. And you have facilitating, which is typical for enabling teams when they're facilitating knowledge and their experience to other teams. But it can happen between any kind of teams. So actually, platform teams often have to facilitate knowledge, because if they are the experts around, let's say, monitoring or observability, they will be in a good place to help the teams learn about what is a good monitoring approach, what should we be looking at, etc. Right? So they're in a good position to facilitate knowledge to the teams as well. It's not just making the service available, it's actually helping teams understand how to use it and understanding that domain. So this is what the report found as well. Being deliberate about team setup and their interactions, or their desired interactions, is also key to high-performing organizations. So just be careful about, it's not that collaboration is bad, it's good if we have a clear idea of why are we collaborating, for how long, what's the purpose, and when are we going to know that collaboration is over, right? We achieved the goal. Just be careful when collaboration is sort of masking kind of dependencies between teams that probably are not that healthy because they're blocking dependency. So high-performing organizations welcome this kind of more explicit, purposeful interactions with clear goals and duration. They understand why that's going to be helpful. There's an interesting example. So I won't go in depth about the case studies, but I just wanted to mention a couple of them. Adidas, for example, they talked a lot about their internal platform engineering approach, where a few years ago all the development was done by vendors. They were basically just managing projects internally at Adidas, and they turned it around, and now they have a huge, very strong internal platform engineering approach. And one thing that's interesting that you can see here, hopefully, these are the services that they have in the platform, multiple things, identity access management, data platform, etc. And what they're saying is that for each of those services, they understand what are the interaction modes that are happening, right? So for a given platform service, it could be already as a service. It's kind of mature and being consumed by others in this self-service approach. They might be collaborating with the application teams or streamline teams to understand what else do you need, what are other use cases that you need to cover, or what is difficult about the service that you would like us to improve, right? And enabling, as I mentioned, they're in a good place to sort of do kind of internal consulting, but in a teaching way, right? Not to do the work of the application teams, but to help them learn faster. So it's quite interesting. I recommend having a look. They've given multiple talks over the years about their internal platform engineering. And another kind of aspect that we tend to hear in middle-performing organizations, and this has been promoted by DevOps, and again, it's a matter of interpretation, right? Build and run teams are great, but when are they autonomous, and to what extent should they be autonomous or not? So if cognitive load is left unbounded, says the report, then performance metrics will be negatively affected, preventing teams from evolving to higher levels. What we're saying here is basically, okay, we want to have build and run teams in the sense that we have teams that own their service or application, and they do the development, they do the changes. Hopefully, they're also involved in the product decisions as well. They're not just given a list of tasks to do. But especially, they take ownership of development and the operations, right? When the service has a problem, they are directly responding to that, not some far away level 3, 4, 5x away from the actual customers. That's not what we want. The problem is if we think that, okay, we just leave these teams to do all of this stuff by themselves, they're going to be in trouble, right? If you just think about it, I once was talking to a client, and they told me when they looked at how many different tools the teams had to deal with, tools and libraries and frameworks, etc., was over 100. Just imagine that. If you're trying to be productive and understand more than 100 tools, frameworks, etc., in your day-to-day work, that's not very reasonable, right? It's not very productive. And so, yes, we want build and run teams in terms of ownership, but they need help, basically, right? And And actually what we've seen in some situations where you had high-performing teams that were able to respond very quickly, but because the cognitive load, how much they had to know to do their work, kept increasing, either because they had more responsibilities, more services to deliver, and because maybe the tool chain was increasing. Now we have more and more things that we need to worry about. In some cases, they actually went back to mid-performing. So that can also happen. It's not because we achieved, at least according to these metrics, high performance, that we're going to stay there forever. Things change, and if we're not careful with what we're asking from teams, they might actually revert back. So a valuable platform actually focuses on reducing cognitive load of streamlined teams. Why is this important to talk about cognitive load? Because if we're thinking that the platform is just about technical services, we might actually be increasing cognitive load on teams. Because if we're providing more services, but they're difficult to understand, difficult to use, the teams might get more overloaded. Now I have to understand how this deployment service works. I don't understand the API, or I don't understand which parameters I have to provide, etc. So reducing cognitive load means we're focusing very much on the developer experience, on the user experience for consuming the platform, right? It's not just the feature set. So very briefly, cognitive load means the total amount of mental effort being used in the working memory. So this is coming from cognitive load theory by psychologist John Sweller back in the 70s, I think. What's interesting is that there are different types of cognitive load. And cognitive load depends on which domain we work in, what kind of tasks we need to do. But there's intrinsic cognitive loads, kind of related to your skills, the things you need to know just to do your day-to-day work. Extraneous is sort of the mechanics, what needs to happen for us to deliver changes to our customers and changes to our service, etc. Sort of the mechanics of the work we do. And germane is everything around the actual domain, right? If we're working with banking, for example, we need to understand, bank accounts. We need to understand a lot of things in the domain that we're providing some software-based service. So extraneous, in particular, you can sort of think of it as distractions to our work, right? If we're a streamlined team, we're trying to focus on, I don't know, we need to support some new type of bank account or some new kind of interest rate for some bank account. That's what we should be focusing on. How do I translate that to the software, right? Not having to worry about how do I test this or how do I deploy it. Ideally, we'd like those things to be easy, very easy to do and very quickly. So it's kind of distractions that we have in extraneous cognitive load. And what we would like is to focus most of our attention on the germane aspects, right? The actual business needs and the customer needs. What's interesting as well, especially when we're talking about things like CI/CD, monitoring, observability, etc. Again, for the streamlined teams or application teams, if you want, those are extraneous. They're building up extraneous cognitive load. If the teams have to know all the details about this, the tooling, infrastructure, all of these things, right? But if you think from the platform team's point of view, that's actually germane. This is what we do. We provide the monitoring service or we provide the deployment service. So this is our business domain for the platform, is the monitoring, is the observability, and so on. So we're actually shifting what was extraneous cognitive load in some teams to germane cognitive load in the platform teams. So that's great. And so some examples similar to what Adidas had as well, some of the things you might have in a platform, and then because the platform is providing, hopefully, some good abstractions at the right level that the streamlined teams can consume easily, and some APIs that are easy to understand, etc., then that's how we're reducing the extraneous cognitive load on the streamlined teams, right? We're pushing that into the platform, but the key is how are we doing that? So a combination of streamlined and platform teams is an effective way to manage cognitive load at scale. To some extent, we can reduce cognitive load with automation, better tooling, learning, and all that. But there is an amount of cognitive load that's not going to go away. That is part of what we need to know for our business. So having a way to manage that more effectively is quite useful. So again, just be careful. And I think that's part of the problem with mid-performing organizations. They kind of buy into, hopefully at some point they buy into the idea, okay, we need teams with ownership, build and run ownership. Hopefully even more than that, end-to-end ownership of a service or application. But how does that translate in reality? Because we don't want to leave these teams with sort of unbounded cognitive load that keeps increasing over time. Are people familiar with the Tech Radar from ThoughtWorks? It comes out, I think, twice a year, more or less, or at least every year. And so they actually, what they do is people from ThoughtWorks like Martin Fowler, Rebecca Parsons, and other people look at kind of the trends and what they suggest to adopt or trial or hold or be careful. So they last year, they said you should adopt platform engineering product teams. So this idea that the platform is composed of teams that understand what product they provide or service and who are the customers. So they said they consider platform engineering product teams to be a standard approach for high-performing IT or organizations. So that was interesting. And this relates to high-performing organizations that have this kind of ecosystem of loosely coupled teams that promote fast flow and continuous learning. So again, if we have more clarity on which teams we have, what type of teams we have, what do they own, and how should they interact over time, it helps us improve our performance. One interesting example, as we start talking about this platform as a product approach, and I'll talk a bit more about that, Uswitch is a company in the UK for comparison of different home services like electricity and internet, etc. What's interesting, and I'll be very brief, but you can find more on our website on teamtopologies.com. What's interesting is that early on, they basically had only streamlined teams. And they were, in the beginning, this worked quite well. These teams could make decisions very quickly. What are we going to use AWS? What kind of monitoring are we going to do? So at early stages of the business development, this actually worked quite well. But over time, as they grew and they had more teams and they had obviously a larger customer base, this was actually slowing them down because of the cognitive load that I was talking about. And so fast forward several years, they have something like this today. Probably this is out of date already. But what was key at Uswitch is that they went from this, there was no platform team. Basically, teams was just told to use AWS and do what you want to get the things done. And then they started with the cloud infrastructure team. What's interesting is that they took a really product approach. They started with one customer, one of the streamlined teams that started using the cloud infrastructure platform, then another one and another one. And they were looking at what we need to solve to increase adoption of the cloud infrastructure platform. So they were thinking about customer problems and collaborating with them to find good solutions in the platform. And so as that approach was quite successful, then they ended up with other platforms, and then you start having this sort of layered or nested approach where you might have different platforms, as I mentioned earlier, for data. They have something around affiliate marketing, etc. Again, if you want to learn more about that example, we have a case study on the website. And so when mid-performing organizations talk about another thing they say is we have a platform team that solves problems for other teams. Okay, that makes sense, and we want to do that. But again, how does that happen? Because there will be differences there that make it more performing, less performing. So the report found the existence of platform team does not inherently unlock higher evolution DevOps or higher performance, right? We do need them, but it's not just saying we have a platform team. And it's also important just for us to have a kind of a reference. This is what we talk about when we talk about these self-service platforms. Is a digital platform is a foundation of self-service APIs, tools, services, knowledge, and support, meaning we have teams providing that, which are arranged as a compelling internal product. So we're getting to this idea of the platform as a product, and we're going to see why that's important. And so the report found that these high-performing organizations tend to treat their platform as a product. And so that means they're looking to create a compelling value proposition for the application teams. What is the value of using the platform? And obviously then live up to that and make sure that the value is there for the application teams. So I'm talking about platform as a product. What does that mean? Well, basically, let's think about what is a product and replace with platform and see what comes out. A platform as a product is optional to use. We shouldn't force teams to use it because that sets kind of the wrong incentives. If we're thinking about the platform and the different services as product with customers, we need to understand who are the customers internally, right? Because not all the teams have the same experience. They have different approaches, different knowledge, etc. And Courtney Kissler, who has worked she has been CTO at Nike, Starbucks, and other companies, she said she never found that mandating standards, practices, process frameworks to have adoption, right? Teams might follow because they are forced to, but they're not really feeling like it helps them. This doesn't accelerate the teams. It's just one more thing we need to do. Now we have to use this framework, or we have to use this tool because we're mandated. That's very different from someone adopting the framework or adopting some service because we understand what is the value it provides to us. A platform as a product is also carefully designed and curated for its customers, meaning we have to understand who the customers are in the first place to be able to design it for them and curate it for them. A platform as a product evolves to take advantage of technology changes. It's not stuck with some very old technology that we cannot change. We need to be able to change technology to make the platform easier to consume and better for our customers. And finally, a platform as a product uses modern product management and follows the adoption lifecycle. So remember, I showed you the adoption lifecycle for DevOps in general. We should be looking at that also internally in the platform, right? So we have a service that we provide to our customers. Where is the service? Because there will be early adopters, teams that are really keen to try new stuff and they really value the platform and they want to be the first to try something new. But then you're going to have some early majority, hopefully at some point, where you start seeing some momentum and you start seeing more teams adopting a service, and you're going to have, hopefully, late majority, right? At some point, this service is quite stable, mature, almost every team is using it, right? There's no reason, if it's easy to use, understand, helps the teams do their work, why wouldn't you use it? So these are some of the things that might seem very different, perhaps, from what you've seen in the past when we're talking about platforms, right? And again, that's what maybe some mid-performing organizations or many are not there yet. And when we have this approach, we get happier users, typically engineers. We have less technology bloat because we're not just focusing on providing technical solutions in the platform. We're focusing on how does this help reduce cognitive load, how we make it easier, simpler, to improve the workflows for the application teams. And it's designed for cognitive load or with cognitive load in mind, right? Not just technical aspects. So highly evolved platform teams understand their internal customers. This is something you need to do to provide a platform as a product and offer a curated set of technologies for infrastructure and development capabilities. Like I said, you can then have other types of platforms that build on top of this kind of key infrastructure and development capabilities. One of the stats from the report showed that high-performing organizations make a lot more use of internal platforms as defined here as a digital platform that is self-service compared to mid and lower performing organizations. And now also, this is sort of a word of advice. Some of you maybe have started seeing people talking about, well, platform engineering is replacing DevOps. Now we don't need DevOps anymore. Kind of reminds me of the no ops some years ago, right? We don't need ops anymore. What are you talking about? Service needs to run somewhere, and it needs to be taken care of. So it's not replacing DevOps, but it's really a key way to enable some of DevOps goals of fast flow, minimizing waste, fast feedback. And so it is a key approach today, I would say. And that's partially what's distinguishing high-performing organizations. So just having a platform team, yes, we're trying to solve common problems, but often we're kind of stuck a little bit in the shared services mentality, right? Where we have some shared services, we put them together in some box that we call a platform, and we provide this to other teams. So platform as a product is much more than that. Now, what's interesting with the tech radar from ThoughtWorks that this year, so 1 year later, after recommending the platform product teams, they're saying, hold on, we're seeing the platform team label applied to teams dedicated to projects that don't have clear outcomes or well-defined set of customers. This is, I think, what's happening in some of the mid-perform organizations that are starting to adopt or trying to adopt this platform approach, but they haven't realized the change in mindset to what a product really is and understanding your customers, understanding the adoption life cycle and all that. They're just trying to, maybe they renamed teams, they created a new platform, but they're still working in the old way. So high-performing organizations treat the platform as a product, curated experience for the users. But this is hard, right? This is quite hard to get to, but it depends what you want. Do you want to get to higher performance? You probably need to focus on this. And why is it hard? So some of the things I've seen, at least, that are hard for platform teams trying to work in this product approach. First of all, metrics are stacked against you. Essentially, it's quite easy to measure the costs of the platform, right? The cost of technology, cloud, and also the cost of the teams. But it's not so easy to measure the benefit of the platform directly, right? Because the benefit is you're accelerating the application teams or streamline teams. You're helping them get to higher performance to those 4 key metrics to improve that, being able to deploy more frequently, being able to recover from problems faster because we have better observability, we have better monitoring, etc. But you can't just measure directly and say, we spent 10 and we got 20 in return, right? And so it requires changing the mindset of sometimes C-level as well to understand we can't measure directly sort of the value of the platform because it's kind of manifested in the application teams, in them being able to do more faster. We do have metrics for platforms. We can look at adoption metrics, we can look at reliability metrics, we can look at the actual DORA metrics in the platform, right? How quickly can we change the platform? But it's not a one-to-one costs this, we get this in return, right? So you need kind of senior management to be on board as well. Then the second one, customer centricity mindset takes time. It's not just because we say, oh yes, we're going to focus on customers, we're going to understand them. Yes, there are techniques, there are ways we can do that, but it takes time, and it's frustrating sometimes. And for platform teams, your customers are also your peers. So the relationship's a bit different from someone on the street or some company that subscribes to our product. No, our customers are the people that we work with on a daily basis. So it's a different dynamic, right? And they can be sometimes much more critical of the platform. Sometimes they can be very favorable towards the platform, but it's a different dynamic. So the customer centricity is both from the platform teams as well as from the sort of the receiving teams also need to understand, okay, things are changing. They're not just mandating services for us to use. We can actually have an active voice and explain what do we need, how should it be provided, etc. The third one, trust is hard to gain. in any context, but especially in a remote context, if we are in an application team, we don't see often maybe the platform teams, the actual faces of the people who work there. We might not have very direct contact, only on Slack or some other chat tool, right? So that doesn't help promote trust between the teams and individuals, right? So that's another thing that's hard, especially in remote. And when we think about the adoption lifecycle, it means it's going to take time. It's no longer, okay, we had a new service or some new features, we developed them, we delivered them, and now it's ready to use, and we're done. No, we're never done, because we need to look at the adoption lifecycle, because we're not mandating things on teams anymore. We're offering a product, and we need to see the adoption, and we need to see what is the friction. Why are we getting, a majority of teams to use this service? Why are they complaining? Maybe it's difficult to understand. Maybe they don't have time to learn about this service, etc. And last one that I've seen, at least, this shared service legacy is hard to go away. This idea that, okay, this is sort of a box where we put things together that we provide to other teams. That has been kind of going on for so long, at least ever since I started working in the industry, which is a long time ago. It's hard to go away. It's hard to change. So I think we can appreciate that it takes effort to go into this approach of platform as a product, and hopefully you've seen today why that matters, why that's important if we want to get to higher performing teams and organizations, teams of teams. So again, the Adidas example, I'm not going to go into a lot of details, but you can see the things they worry about. They think about, how much do we spend on developing the platform versus sort of internal consulting and advising. They think about what is the platform roadmap as a product, what is the support we need, what does that mean, how do we provide good levels of support, etc. And then they look at metrics and so on. Again, a really interesting example to look at from Adidas. And I'm about to finish, but one of the key conclusions from the report is then the key to escaping the middle phase, successful platform approach. Obviously, it's not the only thing, but this is what we looked at today. This platform team approach makes sense given the fact that implementing a platform approach well requires well-defined team responsibilities and interactions, right? So everything we've seen today helps us achieve this platform as a product approach. But it takes time. We need to invest in it. We need to understand, it's going to take time until we get to this customer-focused platform, self-service platform that is not mandated, right? But the advantage is there. We can see the benefits now. So I'm just going to finish. There are some resources. I think we'll make the slides available, probably. If you want to learn more and look at the examples, we also have online academy. We created a code called DODPT 2022 that gives you 15%. But we tried, so in the book, in Team Topologies, we kind of give an introduction to what is platform teams and how they interact with other teams. But we really need to think about these things, right? It's the topics that matter. Think about the value of the platform, what is the value proposition, who are the customers, what is the experience of using the platform, and then the adoption cycle, right? So these things, I would say, are key aspects to look at. And with that, I thank you very much. I hope I lived up to Charity's amazing talks, and hopefully we can have her another time. But thank you very much for listening, and I'll be around the 2 days, so feel free to reach out and ask questions or have a chat. Thank you very much.
Hi, Manuel. First of all, thanks for the talk. Given that this presentation was a lot about cognitive loading, I currently have a dilemma, and it's quite a good opportunity to make this question, because specifically thinking about microservices architectures, and I kind of see two types of CI/CD pipelines there. Let's say product pipelines that are pipelines that basically pick the microservices artifacts and builds the product itself, and then microservices pipelines, let's say that is everything behind that, to build the microservice, to test it, and to generate the artifacts and to upload it to a given artifact repository, let's say. And of course that the product pipelines needs to belong to the platform team, but the microservices pipeline, I kind of have mixed feelings around that. One of the things that I listen a lot is about trying to build generic pipelines that are able to cover all types of microservices, and then the teams can pick up these skeletons. But at the same time, there are too many details for each microservice that might not make sense to the others. So I would like to listen to your thoughts about if this kind of pipelines should belong to the platform team and make them more generic, or if they should be built by the teams themselves.
Yeah, thank you. I'll answer maybe not just specifically about microservices, but I think in general, the aspect of CI/CD and pipelines is something where we need to be careful what's inside the platform, what's outside. Because if we're thinking from the perspective of fast flow and reducing cognitive load, it's good to have different options, right? And so, again, understanding that we have different teams in the organization, some might want to have more fine-grained control and be able to, for those microservices pipelines, that we need to be able to control very detailed things. And other teams will just say, I just want this to work and build the stuff that I need for my microservice with kind of some useful defaults, and I don't have to worry about that. So we have different needs in the organization. There's a good example from Spotify where they actually have their CI/CD platform with different entry points. They have kind of stuff already made, pipelines with default configuration and activities. So some teams just use that, don't have to worry. Other teams actually use the API, so they don't have any graphical interface. They just use directly the API, and so they have more fine-grained control. And they even have more options than that, right? I think with CI/CD, but with anything, what's different with this approach is think about the collaboration between platform and the application teams. It's not that we decide, and it also evolves over time. It's not just in one moment in time we decide this is what the platform is going to do, and that's it. What's difficult and important is to evolve the boundary of the platform. And maybe some things need to come into the platform because we've seen that multiple teams are struggling and have high cognitive load. So let's provide a way in the platform that makes that simpler. Other times might be the opposite. We put too much in the platform, we're abstracting too many things, and now teams need to go a level deeper to be able to change some stuff here, and they can't because they're blocked here. And so, like in the Spotify example, maybe we can have different entry points. Some teams are going to enter here at the higher abstraction, other teams at the lower abstraction. But you need to have the conversations to get to that point of understanding what different teams need. Yeah, good question.
So